and welcome back to the channel. My name is Judy and I love travel and use it as a way to understand history and geography. Today we are visiting Chinon, France in the famous Loire Valley. Chinon is a vibrant town that beautifully blends a rich history and modern charm. People live here. They work, they eat, they shop, and they have fun in an area that is filled with a lively market and bustling cafes. The city attracts visitors eager to experience medieval architecture and explore the history that went along with it, as well as a chance to visit a town that isn't quite as crowded as some of the more famous chateaus in the Loire Valley. The biggest attraction here probably is the medieval castle, shown here, sitting on a cliff and dominating the entire countryside. We will visit it briefly at the end of our tour. If you want to learn a great deal more, check out the companion episode, Chinon, the Castle. I'll put the link in the description box below. For now, however, let's take in the town, see the sights, meet a few of the prominent residents who've lived here over many, many centuries, learn some history, have a glass of wine, and walk the cobblestones with me, the armchair traveler, as your guide. Welcome to Chinon, a small town with a big personality and an even bigger role in history, though for a long time largely forgotten. Unlike the flashier Loire Chateau, Chinon charms with its authentic streets, lively markets, and rich past. Its name is something of a mystery. Some people say it comes from a Celtic personal name, others from the Latin word for dog, or even for some feature long forgotten in the local landscape. The Romans likely set up a small outpost on this cliff, defending the river with a watchtower and a wooden palisade rather than a full city. As Rome's influence faded, Chinon passed through Visigothic and Muslim control until Charles Martel's victory at the Battle of Tours secured Frankish rule in the area. By 800, Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the Pope, uniting Western Europe and blending Roman, Christian, and Germanic traditions, which became the foundation of the Holy Roman Empire. After his death, however, the empire fragmented, and the Loire Valley became part of a kingdom called Neustria, or Western France. These kings needed help to secure their property, and that generally came from local nobles. Around 930, one of them, a man named Ingelger, the ancestor of the Plantagenet clan, became Viscount of Anjou. Centuries later, his descendant, Henry II, chose Chinon as his continental royal residence and transformed it into a royal showplace. Castles and fortifications are never big enough to hold everyone who lives or works in the neighborhood. Over time, a town developed, initially stretching out along the banks of the Vienne River and climbing uphill. This would have been a busy area, stuffed with merchants, tradespeople, clerics, churches, religious sites, and far more. The noble family did not live in the castle full time. Nobles floated from palace to palace as administrative needs demanded and would move on from any one site once they had been there long enough for the stench to become overwhelming. When they moved in, they brought all of their furnishings with them. When they left, they took everything. The Plantagenet family eventually lost control of Chinon and most of its continental empire. The castle's military role faded as French kings preferred Loire pleasure palaces, leaving Chinon as a historic fortress rather than a royal residence. From Roman outpost to wooden keep to Henry II's royal fortress, the siege by Philip II, and even Joan of Arc's meeting with Charles VII, Chinon has seen centuries of strategy, ambition, and history. Walking these streets today, you can almost hear the echoes of medieval power and intrigue. Today, our tour begins not with the castle, but in the heart of the old town itself, the local market, where history meets daily life. This is the Place Jeanne d'Arc, a lively square that serves as Chinon's beating heart. If you're visiting here on a Saturday, this is the place to be. There's a weekly market that fills the square with vendors with fruits, vegetables, local wines, cheese, meats, and the kind of energy you only find in a French town market. The locals are here shopping, chatting with neighbors, and yes, even with tourists like me who are trying desperately to blend in or possibly just looking for a snack. The square, however, is more than just a marketplace. It's part of a story that stretches back to the Roman times. The square is conveniently located halfway between the train station and the fortress, so if you're arriving here by train, you'll have to walk right through it. On market day, it is absolutely unmissable. Visiting Chinon isn't just a trip through history, it's a journey through taste. From world-famous Chinon red wines made with Cabernet Franc grapes, which aren't that popular in America, to fresh goat cheese, slow-cooked pork roulettes, and seasonal market treasures, the town blends heritage, flavor, and terroir. Aside from the vendors, one of the most stunning features is this gorgeous statue of Joan of Arc. shown in armor and mounted on horseback. It's impossible to miss, even when it's surrounded by parked cars. You could spend the rest of the day here, lingering around the market and the nearby streets, gossiping with the local people and sampling the goods, but it's time for us to push on. The market, however, loses its charm the rest of the week when it's just a quiet parking lot, resting, waiting for Saturday when history and the community will fill it up all over again. Every city or town in every country has, or claims it has, a hometown hero. Check out any Wikipedia page and you'll usually find them listed toward the end as notable people. This is Francois Rabelais, one of France's literary giants and often called the French Shakespeare. Like Shakespeare, he wrote in the language of everyday people. His masterpieces, Gargantua and Pantagruel, were among the very first novels, mixing satire, fantasy, and social commentary. But there's a catch. Languages evolve over time. What was crystal clear in the 1500s is now a major headache for modern French students. I should know, I was an advanced French student back in the day, and even a dictionary couldn't help me. Rabelais' writing is packed with 16th century slang, jokes, and wordplay that are a foreign language today. He wrote in what's called the vernacular, not Latin, not the lofty court speech, but speech of the local people, making his work accessible to everyday readers, even if that accessibility is pretty hard to find for us today. His true legacy? It wasn't the stories. He believed that literature and knowledge should be for everyone, not just the elite. And 5 centuries later, that vision still resonates, making him one of Chinon's most important hometown heroes. Chinon proper begins at the riverbank and spreads out uphill toward the fortress. Walking along the Rue Voltaire, I felt centuries of stories underfoot, both figuratively and literally. Cobblestones here are charming, but they're uncomfortable to walk on and dangerously slippery when they're wet. You'll find timber-framed medieval houses rubbing shoulders with Renaissance mansions. There are shops, wine bars, and cafes, and bookstores to invite you to linger longer, but every facade, every beam, tells a story of 1,000 years. Those stories converge here at the Grand Carroy, a kind of crossroads in the center of Old Chinon. There are 3 remarkable houses. This is the Maison au Dragon. The carved wooden decorations seem to be dragons ready to swallow up the beams whole, playful, whimsical, and a touch from the 15th century, showing off the craftsmanship of the area. Next, the Maison Rouge, which was built between the 14th and 15th centuries. Its crimson-painted timbers make it instantly recognizable. For centuries, it served merchants, guilds, and travelers, and later became an inn. Today, it's probably the most photographed medieval house in Chinon, and a symbol of the town's wealth, skill, and enduring charm. Why did they paint it red? Well, there are several theories about it, but this was the time of the plague. Many people believe that the plague was brought by demons. The color red? Well, perhaps the local people thought that would scare off the demons. We find the Maison des États Généraux. In October of 1428, Charles VII summoned the Estates General here and borrowed 400,000 livres, enough to equip the army that Joan of Arc would lead to victory at Orléans the next year. That victory helped promote Charles from dispossessed Dauphin to King of France. One quiet corner shaped the destiny of the nation. Over the centuries, the building has become an inn, a bakery, and since the late 19th century, Chinon's Museum of Art and History. Few crossroads in France can claim such weight of destiny, and yet here it sits, inviting you to take a look. Like the market, you could spend the rest of your day here, sipping a cafe or a glass of wine, but now it's time for us to push on. First up, we have the Collégiale Saint-Maximin. It was founded over 1,000 years ago and is a Romanesque church that once rivaled a cathedral in terms of local importance. Saint-Maximin, I think this is a local corruption of the Latin name Maximus, was a 5th century monk who was a devoted disciple of St. Martin of Tours, spreading Christianity throughout the Loire Valley. The local legend credits him with saving the town from a deadly drought by invoking a miraculous rainstorm. The site drew pilgrims from across the region. By the 11th century, it was a hub of religious learning, complete with cloisters, chapels, and schools. Over time, however, it suffered damage from wars, the 100 Years' War, the War of Religion, and decades of neglect. leaving much of it in ruins. Today, the towers still dominate the skyline, and the site has been lovingly restored as a cultural center, hosting music, theater, and other events, and giving new life to a place that witnessed a millennium of devotion and history. Just a short stroll away stands the Gothic Église Saint-Étienne, or St. Stephen's, a jewel of 15th century Chinon. Its soaring nave and delicate stained glass were built for the townspeople, marking life's milestones, baptisms, marriages, and funerals, while offering a place for quiet reflection. Unlike St. Mexme, which was a clerical powerhouse, Saint Etienne has always belonged to the community. Inside, the church's most famous treasure awaits, a statue of Joan of Arc installed here in 1900, some 2 decades before she was canonized as a saint. This image shows us Joan as a woman. She has a sword and body armor, but she's wearing what I'd call a short riding skirt and riding boots. She's depicted as a warrior, but clearly a female warrior. The distinction is important for her story. One of the formal charges against Joan during her 1431 trial was that she wore men's clothing, which the church at the time interpreted as a violation of biblical law. Her prosecutors framed that as what we'd call cross-dressing, claiming it was sinful and evidence of her supposed heresy. Joan defended herself by saying she wore male clothing because it was practical for riding horses and fighting, and for safety, particularly to protect herself from sexual assault while in the male-dominated military camps. The charge was one of the key points used to convict her, though her trial was politically motivated. They would have convicted her even without it. Saint Etienne honors her legacy and offers a space to reflect on the spiritual and political forces that shaped this remarkable town. Saint Maurice is Chinon's principal parish church and sits majestically on the slope between the medieval fortress and the river. Its stones have witnessed over 800 years of devotion, politics, and history. But before we go inside, we need to think about the namesake. His name was Maurice, and here's something you might not expect. He was a black African saint, painted in shining armor by Lucas Cranach the Elder for the Magdeburg Cathedral. Maurice was a 3rd century Christian soldier from Thebes in Egypt. He and his legion were martyred after refusing to renounce their faith under Emperor Maximian. Because of his origins, tradition long remembered him as African. Over the centuries, he's often been shown as a Caucasian European knight. Cranach revived the older tradition, retaining the part about being in armor, but depicting him as distinctly African. This wasn't just an artistic choice, it was deeply symbolic. For the Holy Roman emperors, who claimed Maurice as their patron, his image reinforced the universality of Christianity, a faith that was supposed to transcend ethnicity and bind diverse peoples together under one cross. Maurice was more than a martyr. He was the patron saint of soldiers, a model of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. In Chinon, his name carries those same themes: courage, faith, and protection. The church itself was built between the 12th and 15th centuries and is a blend of Romanesque solidity and Gothic elegance. It wasn't just a parish church, it symbolized Chinon's rise as both a civic and spiritual center in the Middle Ages. And here, in 1489, the church was a gathering place during Joan of Arc's mission to Chinon. Guided by her visions, she managed to convince the deposed Dauphin, who would become Charles VII, to reclaim his throne. The meeting in Chinon sparked a chain of events that led to his coronation in Rheims and the revival of French fortunes in the 100 Years' War. Inside the church, glass windows preserve the legacy. One depicts Joan presenting herself to Charles, a radiant reminder of faith meeting destiny within these very walls. So St. Maurice is more than just stone and glass. It's where devotion met political power, where soldiers found a patron, and where a young peasant girl helped change history. There was something, I never quite figured out what exactly, that almost made me bypass the chapel of St. Radegonde. I had never heard of her, but I was brought up in the Protestant tradition, so that isn't really surprising. And when I saw the building, it looked just like a pile of rocks in front of a cave. I went inside anyway, but was unimpressed at the time and hurried on to see the rest and more famous parts of the city. But the deeper I dug after I got home, the more the story seemed to come alive. In the years since that visit, something remarkable has been revealed. Historians, artists, architects, and restorers have been at work cleaning off plaster and restoring some of the original artwork, as you can see in this image. A hidden fresco, tucked under plaster, and the only image of Eleanor of Aquitaine painted during her lifetime. We'll circle back to the fresco at the end of the visit. Originally, this was a pagan site built around a sacred spring. The site was later Christianized during the Middle Ages. At its heart lies the tomb of one Jean de Chinon, a hermit remembered for being kind and for sheltering a runaway queen named Radegonde. Radegonde was a 6th century Thuringian princess who became queen of the Franks through her marriage to King Clotaire I. Unfortunately, his violence, not uncommon in those days as now, drove her to flee the court from Paris. Passing through Chinon, she stopped over and met, briefly, Jean before continuing on to Poitiers, where she founded the Abbey of the Holy Cross, one of Gaul's earliest and most famous convents and a cornerstone of women's monastic life. In Poitiers, Eleanor of Aquitaine could not have escaped the legacy, or at least knowledge, of Saint Radegonde. Radegonde embodied one model of royal holiness, rejecting power, wealth, and dynastic ambition for a life of prayer and charity. Eleanor's path was almost the opposite. She was twice a queen, mother of kings, a force in politics, and in culture across all of Europe. Yet she surely knew the saint's story, rooted in the very heart of her duchy. It seems likely to me that Eleanor would have visited this chapel during her frequent stays here in Chinon. Over the centuries, the chapel has evolved, but its greatest treasure is a 12th century mural of a royal hunt. It was hidden for hundreds of years under multiple layers of plaster and only rediscovered in 2018. Scholars think that it shows us Henry II, on the right, with Eleanor and perhaps some of their children. The hunting scene is more than just a decoration. It's a statement about the Plantagenet family. Henry appears to be in the forefront, leading the hunt, a visual metaphor for his authority and command. Eleanor is nearby, elegant and composed, signaling her status and influence as not just queen, but the mother of the heirs. Their children are shown surrounding her, smaller in scale, emphasizing lineage and dynastic continuity. Interestingly, the facial figures are somewhat individualized, a rare detail in 12th century art, which usually favored the symbolic over everything else. This makes the fresco feel more personal, as if the artist wanted to hint at the real people behind the symbols of power and possibly had actually met them in person. Every detail, from posture to placement to the hunt itself, communicates control, hierarchy, and noble authority. This fresco shows us not just who they were, but how they wanted to be remembered, and is important for giving us a glimpse, perhaps, of what they actually looked like in life. Roman historians first noticed this bluff as a strategic point, likely establishing a small military outpost to control traffic and watch the approaches between here and other more important, more significant Roman cities. Centuries later, a man named Thibaut the Trickster of Blois built the first medieval fortress here. It was a wooden palisade with a central tower, probably on the northern edge of the bluff, to guard the valley approaches. My guess would be that he planted his fortress on or near the site of the former Roman tower and enclosure. Thibaut was a rival, not a Plantagenet ancestor. Control of Chinon shifted to Geoffrey II Martel of Anjou in 1044. Later on, one of his descendants, Fulk IV, sometimes called the Wretched, rebuilt it in stone. By the mid-12th century, Henry had seized Chinon from his younger brother, Geoffrey the Younger, and was consolidating his continental heartland, Maine, Anjou, Touraine, as well as Normandy, and transforming the fortress here into a royal residence. From Thibaut's wooden palisade, Fulk's stone walls, to Henry II's palace, Chinon evolved as needs changed, with rivalry, strategy, and ambition always flavoring the mix. This became a favorite home of Henry II and his queen, Eleanor, here on the continent, and a seat of power for the Plantagenet Empire, which stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. The fortress is divided into 3 separate, individually defensive and mutually supporting sections. Let's take a quick walk through Chinon Castle, which is still an important tourist destination. In the 11th centuries, visitors would have climbed up from the riverbanks and entered through the Fort St. George, probably near today's Visitors Center. This was a fortress built to impress and defend, with walls, towers, and a gatehouse overlooking the Vienne River. When Henry lived here, he and his family likely originally stayed in the central stronghold, in the old tower built by his great-grandfather. It was safe and easily defensible, but far from grand or impressive. Eleanor of Aquitaine, used to royal luxury as a former queen of France, needed something better. So did Henry. Together, they built a proper palace on Fort St. George. Archaeology reveals that this site once had barracks, storerooms, and of course a fresh water well. Archaeological inspection continues today. Most of it was demolished in 1845. Moving on, we go back to that road, cross a ditch over a drawbridge, and arrive at the Château de Milieu, the central fortress. This formidable stronghold, also perched on the cliff and surrounded by walls, was designed for both defense and luxury eventually. You entered by a bridge over a deep dry moat, and you approach what's called the Clock Tower, a heavily fortified gateway which was eventually enlarged by Charles VII in the 15th century. Between 1154 and 1189, Henry expanded this fortress. He built the Royal Lodge, which was used for official receptions, and had a great hall and probably administrative offices. The building was restored in 2003 and now showcases displays on Chinon's history, including Joan of Arc's visit to the area. The final stop here is the Fort de Coudray, which was built around 1160, also on Henry's orders. The fortification provided enhanced defensive capabilities for anyone who was approaching from the southwest. It became a formidable stronghold of its own, again with thick walls and towers. The remains of a round tower built by Philip II after he seized the castle are still on site today. Chinon Castle evolved from a modest wooden structure into 3 standalone, mutually supporting fortresses, showcasing the balance between military strength and royal comfort. However, it could not withstand the advancements of gunpowder and artillery, which led to its eventual abandonment. There's far more to learn about the castle, more than I could ever cover in this quick walkthrough. If you're curious, check out a companion episode, Chinon the Castle. I'll put the link in the description box below. And now we wrap up our journey through Chinon. We've explored its history, seen the market, been to the castle, met a few of the inhabitants who made this place so famous. Thank you for joining me on this walk. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can discover the wonders of Chinon and my other videos. Until next time, à bientôt.